What if the love of your life gave you something you never knew you needed? Daniel sat alone in the dim light of their bedroom, staring at the small, neatly wrapped box resting on his nightstand. It wasn't his birthday. It wasn't an anniversary. It wasn't any special occasion at all. Yet the box was there, wrapped in golden paper with a white ribbon tied carefully. The kind of wrapping Emily always used when she wanted something to feel personal. A small note sat on top, handwritten in her delicate cursive. For you. His fingers brushed against it, his heart thudding with a mix of curiosity and unease. It was unusual for Emily to surprise him like this. Their marriage, 7 years strong, had slowly settled into routine comfort. Morning coffee, quick kisses before work, tired smiles at dinner. Love still lived there, yes, but surprises, they had become rare guests. Daniel hesitated for a moment before untying the ribbon. The sound of paper tearing filled the quiet room. Inside, he found something strange. A single bronze key. It wasn't new. It was heavy, old-fashioned, almost antique. He turned it over in his hand, feeling its cold metal against his skin. That's when he noticed something engraved along the side. For the door you forgot to open. A chill ran down his spine. He stared at it for a long moment, confused. What door? Their house wasn't that big. He knew every room. It had to be some kind of metaphor. Maybe a romantic gesture he didn't fully understand yet. But deep down it didn't feel like a joke. It felt serious. He wanted to ask her about it right away. But Emily was asleep beside him, breathing softly under the warm glow of the bedside lamp. She looked peaceful. Too peaceful to wake. So Daniel placed the key back in the box and set it on the nightstand. But he didn't sleep that night. His mind kept circling back to that single line. The door you forgot to open. By morning, curiosity had turned into quiet frustration. As Emily poured coffee into his mug, Daniel finally asked, "So, what's the key for?" Emily didn't even look up. She just smiled faintly, her tone calm, almost playful. "You'll know when the time's right." That answer didn't help at all. It only made the mystery heavier. Daniel wanted to laugh it off, but something in her eyes, something distant, kept him silent. All day at work, he couldn't focus. The key haunted him. He kept picturing it, the rough metal, the strange engraving, the sense that it belonged somewhere he hadn't noticed before. When he returned home that evening, Emily wasn't in the living room like usual. Instead, there was a note taped to the fridge in her handwriting. "Follow the sound." He frowned. "Follow the sound? What sound?" Then he heard it, faint but clear, soft piano music drifting through the house, coming from somewhere upstairs. His heartbeat quickened. Emily wasn't one for games, but this felt like one. A strange, romantic scavenger hunt. He climbed the staircase, one cautious step at a time. The music grew louder, echoing through the hallway, a melody he didn't recognize. It wasn't coming from their bedroom. It was coming from the far end of the hall. The attic. That made no sense. They hadn't used the attic in years. It was always locked, filled with dusty boxes and forgotten furniture. He paused in front of the narrow wooden door, the one that had always stayed closed. The music stopped. Complete silence. His pulse raced. Slowly, Daniel reached for the knob. And to his surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open an inch. The faint scent of old wood and dust filled his nose. The light switch didn't work, so he used his phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, landing on stacks of boxes, old photographs, a few broken picture frames. He stepped inside. "Emily?" he called softly. No answer. Then he saw it. In the far corner of the attic, something glimmered faintly. A small wooden chest. It looked ancient, hand-carved, the kind of thing you'd find in a forgotten story. His heart thudded as he walked toward it. The chest had a lock, round, bronze, and perfectly shaped for the key he'd found. He froze. No way. For a moment he hesitated. He could feel the weight of something big pressing on him. Like once he opened it, he couldn't go back. But curiosity won. He knelt down and slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a slow twist, it clicked open. Inside there were letters, dozens of them, tied together with a faded ribbon. The paper looked old, yellowed at the edges. His name was on every envelope, written in the same looping cursive, Daniel. but something felt off. The dates on the top corner of each letter were years before they had even met. He blinked. That couldn't be right. Maybe she'd just made them up. Some kind of artistic surprise. But as he picked one up and unfolded it, his breath caught in his throat. The first line read, "To the man I'll someday love. I don't know your name yet, but I already miss you." His heart began to race. The letter was written like a diary, full of raw emotion, Emily describing the kind of love she dreamed of finding, the kind of man she hoped would heal her heart someday. Every word felt hauntingly intimate. Daniel read another, then another. Every letter was written to him, or rather, to the idea of him. Her loneliness, her hope, her heartbreak, all poured into pages that seemed to predict their future together. It was both beautiful and deeply unsettling, but something inside him twisted uneasily. These weren't love letters meant to be found. They felt like confessions, secrets whispered into the past. As he reached the bottom of the chest, one last envelope caught his eye, smaller, sealed in red wax. There was no date on it, just one line on the front. "Do not open until you're ready to forgive me." Daniel froze. Forgive her? For what? A nervous chill ran through his chest. The attic suddenly felt colder, the silence heavier. He didn't open the letter, not yet. His mind was spinning. He didn't know what to think. Was this some kind of emotional test? A message from before they met? Or had she done something she hadn't told him about? Something tied to the word forgive. His fingers tightened around the envelope. It was light, fragile. Whatever truth it held, it waited quietly, patient, knowing he'd open it eventually. Just then, he heard a sound behind him. Footsteps on the attic stairs. He turned quickly, startled. Emily stood there, framed in the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Her eyes flickered from the open chest to the letters scattered around him. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled. "You weren't supposed to find that yet," she whispered finally, her voice breaking. Daniel stood frozen, the sealed letter still in his hand. "What is this, Emily?" Tears welled up in her eyes, glistening in the dim light. "Not now," she murmured, shaking her head. "Please, not like this. Emily, what are you hiding from me?" But she didn't answer. She turned and walked away quietly down the attic stairs, leaving him standing there among the dust, the letters, and the echo of a truth that suddenly felt dangerous. Daniel stared at the red-sealed envelope again, his chest tight, his pulse quickening. The words "forgive me" burned in his mind like fire. He wanted to chase her, to demand answers. But part of him was afraid that the truth inside that envelope might change everything. The faint sound of the piano started again downstairs. The same haunting melody, soft, sad, familiar now. Daniel looked at the chest, then at the door, torn between curiosity and fear. He stepped closer to the attic window, staring at the rain beginning to fall outside, his reflection faint against the glass. Maybe the door he forgot to open wasn't in the house. Maybe it was inside him. But one thing was certain. Whatever Emily had done, whatever she wanted him to forgive, it was only the beginning. And somewhere in the darkness below, her piano music played on, slow and beautiful, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Daniel couldn't focus on anything the next morning. He sat at the kitchen table, the untouched cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. Across the table, Emily quietly buttered her toast, pretending everything was normal. But Daniel's mind was still in the attic, the letters, the chest, the sealed envelope that whispered "forgive me." He wanted to ask her everything right then. But her calm silence terrified him more than any confession could. She looked peaceful, as if she had already accepted something he hadn't yet discovered. When she looked up and caught his eyes, she smiled faintly. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "What are those letters, Emily?" Her hands froze mid-air, knife still hovering above the toast. The light in her eyes dimmed and she looked down. "They're pieces of my past," she said quietly. "You weren't supposed to find them." "That's not an answer," Daniel replied. His voice was calm, but his heart was pounding. Emily exhaled, then stood up and placed her plate in the sink. "Please, Daniel." "Not now, not now." Those words again. The same tone, the same distance. She kissed his forehead before leaving for work, as if nothing had happened, leaving him sitting there with a heart full of questions and a mind full of fear. When she closed the door behind her, the house felt emptier than ever. He couldn't sit still. He went back to the attic, unable to resist. The chest was still there, waiting. The smell of old paper filled the air as he opened it again. The letters lay scattered across the wooden floor, like fallen pieces of someone's soul. Daniel picked up another one. This one dated 8 years ago, 2 years before they met. The handwriting was the same. Careful, graceful, full of emotion. To the man I'll someday love. I hope you'll understand that sometimes love doesn't arrive clean. Sometimes it carries dust, mistakes, and memories. I just hope you'll see past mine. Daniel frowned. What mistakes? What memories? He read another. If I ever find you, I want you to know that I've already lost once, and losing again is my biggest fear. A cold realization began to take shape in his mind. These weren't just dreams of love. They were letters written from pain, from loss. Whoever she had been writing to, it wasn't some fantasy man. It was someone real. Daniel's chest tightened. He kept reading, faster now, desperate for answers. Letter after letter painted a picture of a woman who had loved deeply and lost terribly. And then he found one that changed everything. I saw his face again today. Even after all this time, I still remember the way he smiled before everything went silent. I wish I could tell him I'm sorry. I wish he could see that I'm trying to live the life we planned. Just with someone else. Daniel froze. His breath caught. "Someone else?" he whispered. He read it again, slower this time, but the words didn't change. Emily had loved someone before him, deeply, painfully, and she had never told him. But what was she sorry for? What had gone silent? He sat back, heart hammering in his chest. It felt like the air in the attic was shrinking. He picked up the sealed envelope again. The one marked, "Do not open until you're ready to forgive me." He stared at it, his hands trembling. His mind screamed for him to open it, to just end the guessing, but something inside whispered, not yet. Maybe he wasn't ready to know the kind of truth that needed forgiveness. That night, Emily came home late. Daniel was sitting on the couch, pretending to read, but really just waiting. She looked tired, her hair pulled back, her eyes red. He asked quietly, "Were you crying?" She shook her head, forcing a smile. "Just a long day." He nodded, but didn't believe her. The silence stretched between them like a wall. Then out of nowhere, she said, "I saw you went back to the attic." Daniel stiffened. "You knew?" "I could tell," she said softly. "You're not good at hiding what you feel." He set his book down. "Then tell me the truth, Emily. Who were those letters for?" For a long time she didn't answer. She just looked at him, really looked. And for the first time he saw fear in her eyes. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of being understood. "They were for you," she said finally. "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "I'm not." Her voice trembled. "They were for the man I didn't know yet. But I was writing to keep myself from falling apart. I was writing to someone I hoped would save me someday." "Save you from what?" Daniel asked. Emily looked away. "From my past." He wanted to press her further, but the way she said it, the pain in her tone, made him stop. He saw tears glisten in her eyes, and suddenly his anger softened into confusion. Before he could speak again, she whispered, "Do you believe in fate?" He didn't answer. She smiled faintly. "I used to. I thought love could heal anything. But some wounds don't close just because you find someone new." Then she stood up and walked toward their bedroom. Before closing the door, she turned and said quietly, "If you really love me, don't read the last letter." Daniel sat there for a long time after she disappeared down the hallway. The house was silent again, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Don't read the last letter. But now, that was all he could think about. By midnight, he couldn't fight it anymore. He climbed back up to the attic, flashlight in hand. The rain outside tapped softly against the roof. The chest waited, quiet and patient, as if it already knew what he would do. He knelt down, picked up the red sealed envelope, and held it under the light. The wax was unbroken. The words on the front, "Do not open until you're ready to forgive me," seemed to whisper his name. He hesitated. His hands shook, but before he could tear it open, he noticed something strange. There was a second piece of paper underneath it, one he hadn't seen before. It was folded neatly, almost hidden. He pulled it out. It wasn't a letter. It was a photograph. In the picture, Emily was standing beside a man, smiling, radiant, younger. Her arm was around him. The man had dark hair, kind eyes. On the back of the photo, a single name was written, Matthew. Daniel's stomach dropped. He had never heard that name before. He turned the photo over again, staring at the way she looked at the man. It wasn't casual. It wasn't just friendship. It was love, the kind you couldn't fake. His heart began to race. Matthew. The name echoed in his head. He finally understood. The letters weren't for him. Not at first. They were for this man. The man in the photo. The man she had loved before him. The man she had never told him about. He sat there frozen for what felt like hours, the rain hammering harder against the roof. Everything suddenly made sense. The distance in her eyes sometimes, the sadness in her smile, the silence she carried when she thought no one noticed. It wasn't that she didn't love him. It was that part of her heart still belonged somewhere else. He put the photograph down slowly, his mind spinning. The words on the sealed envelope glowed under the light. Forgive me. Now he knew what she wanted forgiveness for. For moving on, for loving again, for building a new life on top of an old heartbreak. But why hide it? Why all the secrets? Daniel stood up, gripping the letter tightly. Maybe she didn't want to hurt him. Maybe she couldn't face saying it out loud. But hiding the truth had hurt him anyway. He turned off the flashlight and stood in the dark, listening to the sound of the rain. His heart ached with confusion. Love, anger, sorrow, all tangled together. Then, faintly, he heard something downstairs, a door closing. He frowned. Emily had gone to bed hours ago. He rushed down the attic steps, calling her name. No answer. The living room lights were still on. Her phone was on the table, her bag beside it, but she wasn't there. Then he saw it. A note taped to the front door, written in the same delicate handwriting. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. Meet me where we first met. His heart sank. That was the park near their old university, the place where he had spilled coffee on her dress, the place where their story began. Without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and ran out into the storm. The cold rain hit his face as he ran through the empty streets, each step echoing with questions he wasn't ready to face. What was she planning to tell him? Why now? When he reached the park, the streetlights flickered, casting soft yellow circles on the wet pavement. Emily was sitting on the same old bench, looking out at the lake. Her hair was soaked, her coat clinging to her. She didn't look surprised to see him. She just smiled sadly. Daniel, she whispered, her voice breaking through the sound of rain. Before you. I was engaged. He stopped dead in his tracks. The world seemed to freeze. Emily looked down, her fingers twisting nervously. His name was Matthew, she said softly. He died before our wedding. Daniel felt something inside him collapse. Emily's eyes filled with tears. And those letters, they were for him. For years I wrote to him because I couldn't let go, until I met you. She looked up at him then, her eyes shining with pain and truth. But when I met you, something changed. You became the man I was writing to all along. I just never had the courage to tell you. The rain fell harder. Daniel couldn't speak. He just stood there, staring at her, every piece of his heart breaking quietly. She wiped her eyes and whispered, I didn't want you to feel like a replacement. You weren't. You were the answer. The words hit him like a wave, beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. He wanted to hold her, to forgive her, to tell her he understood. But before he could move, Emily looked away and said softly, I just need to know if our love can survive knowing it began as someone else's goodbye." Rain still dripped from Daniel's jacket as he stood before Emily in the park, speechless. The storm had slowed to a mist, but his thoughts were still roaring inside his head. Her confession, about Matthew, about the letters, echoed again and again, each time striking deeper. She had been engaged before him. She had loved before him. And the chest of letters wasn't meant for him at all. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke again, barely louder than the wind. "I wanted to tell you, Daniel, so many times, but every time I tried, I saw how happy you were, and I couldn't risk losing that." Daniel's throat tightened. "So instead you let me find out this way?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for you to find the chest. The attic key? It wasn't supposed to open that door. It was meant to remind you that sometimes love asks us to open new ones." He shook his head, trying to understand, but the ache in his chest made it hard to breathe. "New ones? Emily, I don't even know which door we're standing behind anymore." She looked away, silent, rain sliding down her face like tears that refused to stop. They stood there for a long time, the sound of the wind filling the spaces between them. Daniel's mind spun, every smile, every touch, every moment they had shared, suddenly shadowed by the ghost of another man's name. Emily turned toward the lake. "He died in a car accident 2 weeks before our wedding," she said quietly. "I was the one driving." Daniel's breath caught. He stared at her in disbelief. You were driving?" She nodded, her voice breaking. "We were arguing about stupid things. I looked away for just 1 second. 1 second. Her hands trembled as she continued. "I tried to move on, Daniel. I tried to build a new life, to love again. And I did. But a part of me was still trapped in that car, still hearing the sound of the crash every night." The air between them grew heavy. Daniel could feel her pain, raw and real, but it didn't erase the sting of being the man who came after. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Why didn't you tell me, Emily?" She wiped her tears, whispering, "Because I didn't want to be the woman who was saved out of pity. I wanted to be loved because of who I am, not what I survived." Daniel looked at her, really looked. The woman he'd thought he knew completely was standing before him as a stranger, haunted, fragile, and yet somehow stronger than he'd ever seen her. He wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but his hands wouldn't move. His heart was too full of confusion. "I need time," he said quietly. Emily nodded, as if she had already expected that. "Then take it. I'll be here when you're ready." She stood and began walking away, her figure fading into the mist. Daniel stayed there for a long time, watching her disappear into the gray dawn. What happens when love becomes a mirror of everything you're afraid to face? The next few days passed like a blur. Daniel barely spoke to anyone. The house felt colder, emptier. Emily moved quietly, giving him space, never asking questions. Every sound, the creak of a chair, the hum of the fridge, seemed louder in her silence. At night, Daniel lay awake, replaying everything. The letters, the photo, the confession, the crash. He could feel her pain now, almost as if it lived inside him. And yet, something darker lingered, a doubt he couldn't shake. Why had she given him the key in the first place? Why stir old ghosts if she feared them so much? On the third night, unable to bear it any longer, Daniel went back to the attic. The chest sat there like an unanswered question. He opened it again, searching for something he'd missed. Beneath the pile of letters, under a thin layer of fabric, he found another small box. This one was wooden, carved with initials, E+M. His breath caught. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside were 2 rings tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Wedding bands. On a small note beside them, Emily had written, "Some promises are too painful to wear, but too sacred to forget." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He could almost picture her, years ago, standing in a wedding dress she never got to wear, holding these rings that never saw their day. He picked up one of the rings, its surface cold and smooth. Beneath it, he found a photo. Matthew again, but this time smiling with Emily in front of a church. She looked radiant, alive, unscarred by time. For a moment, Daniel felt a strange mixture of sorrow and admiration. She had lost everything and still learned to love again. But he also felt something else, a quiet ache of insecurity. Could he ever fill the kind of emptiness that man left behind? Downstairs he heard the faint sound of a piano. That melody again. The same one that played the first night. The one she said wasn't meant to be found. Daniel followed it, his heart pounding. Emily was in the living room, her fingers tracing the keys softly, her expression distant. He stood in the doorway, watching. When she noticed him, she stopped playing. "You remember that song?" he asked quietly. She nodded. It was his favorite. Her voice was soft, but the words hit him hard. "Emily," Daniel said carefully, "I don't want to compete with a memory. I can't live in someone else's shadow." She looked at him, her eyes tired. "You're not in his shadow. You're the light that pulled me out of it." Her words were beautiful, but he wasn't sure he believed them. He wanted to, but something inside him still resisted. "Then prove it," he said. "Show me that I'm not just the man you learned to love because you lost someone else." Emily looked down at her hands. "I can't erase the past, Daniel. I'm not asking you to erase it," he said. "I just want to know that our love isn't built on what came before." She stood silently, and then, without a word, she walked past him and went upstairs. Daniel sat there, staring at the empty piano keys. The melody still echoed faintly in his mind. The heart always tells the truth last. The next morning, Daniel woke up to find Emily gone. Her coat, her shoes, her purse, all still there. But she wasn't. Panic rushed through him. He searched every room, calling her name. Nothing. Then on the kitchen counter he saw a folded note. "You were right, Daniel. You shouldn't have to live with my ghosts, but I can't love you completely until I face them. I'm going to the place where it ended. Please don't follow me." His heart dropped. The place where it ended. She meant the crash site. He grabbed his keys and ran out the door, ignoring her words. The drive felt endless, every mile stretching his anxiety thinner. Rain clouds gathered again, gray and heavy, mirroring his thoughts. When he finally reached the road outside the small town where she'd grown up, his headlights illuminated the bent guardrail and the twisted remains of an old tree. The accident site, the one she'd never talked about. Her car was parked a few feet away, empty. "Emily," he shouted into the wind, his voice cracking. Then he saw her, standing by the edge of the road, staring at the tree. She turned as he approached, her face streaked with tears but strangely calm. "I told you not to come," she said softly. He stopped a few steps away. "You think I could just stay home knowing you were here alone?" She smiled sadly. "This is where it all stopped for me, Daniel. My life, my hope, everything. I thought if I came back, maybe I could let it go." He stepped closer. "Then let me help you." But she shook her head. "You can't help me forgive myself." She knelt beside the tree and placed something at its base. It was one of the wedding rings. "He gave me this the night before the accident," she whispered. "He said love is the only thing worth carrying." "I didn't carry it right." Daniel knelt beside her. "Emily, love isn't about what we carry from the past. It's about what we're willing to share now." She looked at him, tears falling freely. "Then why does it still hurt so much?" "Because you're human," he said. "And because you still care." For the first time, Emily let herself cry. Not softly, not politely, but completely. Daniel held her, and for a moment, all the walls between them crumbled. When the rain began to fall again, it didn't feel cold anymore. Later, they sat in silence inside her car, the windshield fogged from their breath. The air between them felt fragile but honest. Emily whispered, "I left one last letter in the chest. It's for you, the one I never meant to write." Daniel turned to her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, eyes glistening. "It's not a goodbye letter, Daniel. It's a truth I was too afraid to say out loud. I wrote it the day I realized I loved you more than my fear. I just never had the courage to give it to you." He reached for her hand. "Then let's go home. Together." She nodded slowly. "But before we do, you need to know something else." He waited, Emily took a deep breath, her voice trembling. The night of the accident. I wasn't the only one in the car. Daniel froze. Her eyes filled again, guilt flooding back. There was someone else. Someone who survived. Someone I never told you about. Who? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. She looked straight at him, her expression unreadable. Matthew's brother. Daniel sat frozen in the car, staring at Emily as the words, "He's the one who sent me the key," echoed in his head. The storm outside beat against the windshield like a drum, but inside, silence pressed heavy between them. Matthew's brother. The name she had never mentioned. The person she said survived. Daniel's throat went dry. You're telling me Matthew's brother is alive? And he's been in contact with you? Emily nodded slowly, her hands trembling on her lap. Yes, his name is Aaron. After the accident, he disappeared for years. But a few weeks ago, he sent me a letter. Inside, it was the bronze key. Daniel's chest tightened. So that key wasn't from you. She shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. No. I thought maybe he wanted me to face the past. The attic, the letters, everything I'd buried. But I didn't think you'd find them first. The realization hit Daniel like cold water. The mystery that had started as a romantic surprise wasn't from his wife at all. It was from a ghost of her past, someone who knew the truth. Even Daniel didn't. He leaned back, staring out into the storm. Why didn't you tell me when you got the key? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Because I was scared. Scared that once I opened that part of my life again, you'd see me differently. And you do, don't you? Daniel didn't answer. The truth was too heavy to speak. The past never stays buried. It waits for the right silence to be heard. They drove home in silence, rain splattering against the windows. When they finally arrived, the house felt different, like the walls themselves knew what had changed. Daniel walked straight to the attic, ignoring Emily's pleas to rest. The chest still sat there, the letters spread like quiet witnesses. He knelt down and looked for anything that might prove what she'd said. And there it was, tucked behind the last layer of paper. An envelope with the name Aaron Matthews written across it. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter, written in neat, controlled handwriting. Emily, 7 years is long enough. It's time you stop pretending you've moved on without facing what really happened. I kept quiet to protect you, but truth has its own way of knocking. The key belongs to the door you locked after the accident. It's time Daniel knew who was really behind the wheel that night. Daniel froze. His breath caught. His hands went cold. The driver? She'd already told him she was driving. What did Aaron mean? He rushed downstairs, his pulse racing. Emily was sitting by the window, staring out at the fading rain. What does this mean? Daniel demanded, showing her the letter. You said you were driving, but Aaron says the one behind the wheel wasn't you. Emily's face went pale. Her lips trembled. For a moment she said nothing. Then she closed her eyes and whispered, Because I wasn't. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. What? Tears rolled down her cheeks. It was Matthew. He was driving that night. I tried to stop him. He'd been drinking after the argument, and I was begging him to let me take the wheel. But he didn't listen. When we hit the curve, I grabbed the wheel. Too late. She buried her face in her hands. The car flipped. I woke up in the hospital. He didn't. And I told everyone it was my fault because I couldn't stand the thought of the world blaming him. I couldn't bear to tell his brother that the man he loved like family had been drinking that night. Daniel felt his heart twist painfully. So you carried his guilt all these years? She nodded slowly. And Aaron knew. He found out later from the police report. But instead of hating me, he just disappeared. Until now. Daniel sank into the chair opposite her, running a hand through his hair. The truth hit him in waves, heavier with each one. Emily hadn't just been grieving. She'd been protecting a dead man's memory at the cost of her own peace. You should have told me, he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes wet. I wanted to. But how do you tell the person who saved you from your past that the past wasn't what it seemed? For the first time, Daniel saw the full picture. The guilt, the fear, the love tangled in loss. She hadn't lied out of betrayal. She had lied out of pain too deep to touch. Forgiveness doesn't come when the truth appears. It comes when the heart is brave enough to listen. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The storm had ended, but the quiet was worse. Every shadow in the room seemed alive with memories. He could hear the piano melody in his head, the one she used to play when she missed him. At around midnight, he went back to the living room. Emily was asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket. Her face looked peaceful, almost like the weight she had carried was finally easing. On the table beside her sat the red sealed envelope, the one he still hadn't opened. He hesitated, staring at it for a long moment. Then slowly he broke the seal. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was hers, elegant, steady, full of emotion. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you know everything. I never wanted to hide behind my pain, but I didn't know how to bring you into it without losing the version of us that was still happy. You were the first person who made me laugh again, who made me feel alive again. But you were also the first person who loved me without knowing how broken I was, and for that I owe you the truth. I never needed saving. I just needed someone to see me as more than my past. You did that. You gave me back my future. Daniel read it twice, his vision blurring with tears. She hadn't asked for forgiveness. She had already forgiven herself, and somehow, that set him free too. He leaned back, exhaling deeply. He finally understood. The gift wasn't the key or the chest or the truth. It was the chance to love her for who she really was, not who she pretended to be. He folded the letter gently and placed it back in the envelope. For the first time in weeks, he felt peace. Even after forgiveness, love still asks one more question. Can it survive the truth? The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains. Daniel made breakfast quietly. When Emily woke up and came into the kitchen, she looked surprised. "You're up early," she said softly. He smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. They sat across from each other, silent but not tense this time. There was a strange calmness, the kind that comes after a long storm. After a while, Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "I read your letter." Her eyes flickered nervously. "And?" He smiled gently. "And I realized something. You didn't give me a key to a mystery, Emily. You gave me a key to understanding you." Tears welled up in her eyes. "So you're not angry?" He shook his head. "No, just sad that you had to carry that alone for so long." She squeezed his hand, whispering, "I thought if I let you in, you'd walk away." Daniel smiled faintly. "I almost did. But then I remembered why I married you, because even in the dark, you never stopped trying to love." For a moment, it felt like the world had finally set itself right again. The air felt lighter, the house warmer. Emily leaned across the table and said softly, "There's one more thing I didn't tell you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "There's more?" She nodded slowly. "Aaron called last night." Daniel froze. "What?" She looked down. "He wants to meet. He said he has something for both of us, something that belonged to Matthew." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Did he say what it was?" She shook her head. "Only that it would close the door completely." Daniel's mind raced. The key, the letters, the guilt. Had Aaron been orchestrating this entire journey to bring them to one last truth? Emily looked at him nervously. "I don't know if I can face him." Daniel took her hand. "You don't have to do it alone." She nodded, grateful but scared. They met Aaron the next evening at a small cafe on the edge of town. He looked older than his photos. Time and grief had carved lines into his face. When he saw Emily, he smiled sadly, his eyes soft with understanding rather than anger. "Emily," he said quietly, "you look just like you did the last time I saw you." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Aaron, for everything." He shook his head. "You don't owe me that anymore. You were a victim too." Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black box. He placed it on the table. "Matthew left this with me the night before the crash. He said if anything ever happened to him, it was meant for the woman he loved." Emily's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a silver locket. She recognized it instantly. It had been missing for years. Inside the locket was a photo of her and Matthew, and behind it, a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly. It was a handwritten note from Matthew. If I don't make it, promise me you'll keep living. Don't get stuck in the wreckage of what was. Someone will come into your life and love you the way you deserve. Don't push them away because of me. Tears streamed down Emily's face. Daniel reached across and held her hand tightly. Aaron smiled faintly. He wanted you to be happy, Emily. You honored that, even if it took you years to forgive yourself. She nodded through tears. Thank you, Aaron, for everything. He stood, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, and said softly, Take care of her. You're the one he was talking about. Daniel didn't know what to say. He just nodded. Aaron gave them one last sad smile before walking out into the evening light, leaving them with the box and a silence filled with peace instead of pain. Emily turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. It feels like the door finally closed. Daniel smiled. Maybe. Or maybe we just learned how to stop standing in front of it. They held hands as the sun dipped behind the horizon, the storm of their past finally breaking into calm. But as they turned to leave, Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, a message from an unknown number. You think the past is done? The truth about that night isn't over.